Welcome again to the Skeptical Buddhists channel. We've spent a fair amount of time exploring how, in our views of things, we tend to see the world's component parts and concepts as fixed and permanent. When we first learn about things, we define them and how we believe they should act, and then perhaps we spend a little time testing our definition, and it seems to hold up fairly well, so we move on. And that definition becomes stuck in our minds. And somewhere in there, we begin to mistake the definition for reality. And then when reality doesn't hold up to our definition, we get an unexpected reaction. And usually we react with displeasure of some sort. How dare things fail to behave as defined? The two examples I gave were of our pretty new car breaking down on the way to work, how upsetting it is to have something we believed we could rely on fail us, and the same again for a parent. I would be surprised if any one of you missed the experience growing up of finding out that one or the other of your parents weren't who you thought they were, which is precisely the concept I'm describing here. The fact that everything does change is covered in Buddhism by the concept of impermanence. And as I said when impermanence had its own episode, the grand concept that things don't last is a no-brainer. However, seeing it on a much finer scale, especially down on the scale of how the shifting nature of reality affects our very human desire to conceive of the world as orderly and definable, seeing it up close and personal in one's own life takes a little more personal insight, and even practice. It is this practice that meditation, and its cousin mindfulness, gives us when we stick to it. As we develop our practice of meditation and mindfulness, it gets easier to see for ourselves how our clinging to views of the way things behave trips us up, causes us to be confused and frustrated by the way the rest of the world behaves, in ways not meeting our expectations. Only by learning to pay attention to what's going on in our lives will we get the information we need to see for ourselves just how vital what the Buddha tried to teach us to see is. We will begin to see the shifting nature of ourselves, of others, how little we really know, how strongly we cling to some ideas, and how others are easier to let go of. This is an ongoing practice in getting a clearer and clearer view of reality, of noticing the filter of our views interfering with our ability to be flexible, of slowly obtaining the right view as opposed to the wrong view. Those are classic terms often seen in translations from the Pali or Sanskrit canon of talks by the Buddha, and they are a little amusing since they are so firmly dualistic, so dogmatic, when what they're trying to describe is quite a bit more subtle than right and wrong. Something closer to skillful view and unskillful view, or accurate view of reality and distorted view of reality. That views can be right or wrong is a view in itself, isn't it? It can be said that the point we're trying to get to with Buddhist practice is the point at which we have no views at all. A point where we just observe the world around us, take action as part of that world, and take each moment, each person, each event, each new encounter as unique. This is what the term Zen seems to be describing, seeing the world without any filters at all. I don't know how you react to that concept, but for myself, it is pretty darned near unimaginable, being that clear-sighted. How do we do that? Do we throw out all past knowledge? That's what they mean when they say beginner's mind, taking on every moment as if it's a brand new subject and we know nothing about it, and none of our past experience applies. Is that what wisdom consists of? Not using one's past experience in the world to estimate the best path into the future? The best way to handle a situation? In the Pali Suttas I've been reading, the Buddha occasionally talks about nibbana, which in Sanskrit is Nirvana, which actually comes from a root word meaning extinguishment, as in putting out a flame. Because that is its root, the word has been misinterpreted by those who only have a dim understanding of what Buddhism is about, as meaning that when we reach nirvana, we cease to exist. Put the extinguishment of nirvana together with an equally vague understanding of not-self, and it is easy to think that what Buddhism is about is making all traces of the self completely disappear, which is only part of the story. The reference to putting out the flame may have begun with one of the Buddha's early sermons to fire worshippers, in which he used fire as a metaphor for desire, for clinging to the desires we all have for comfort and pleasure and security, for retribution or gain, all forms of clinging to the view that these things can give us happiness when, as we know, their changeable nature will prevent them from providing lasting happiness. So, nirvana is the extinguishment of something, but it's not exactly of the self, except so far as the self is a creation of our desires, of the things we cling to, whether it's the vision of ourselves as desirable, our sense of competence, our pleasure in our good works in the world, how good we are at brightening someone else's day, or how good we are at staying mindful. Nirvana, then, is the extinguishment of the created self, of the self made up of the 5 aggregates of body, feelings, actions, knowledge, consciousness. In discussions with fellow Buddhists everywhere, I find that I am not alone in being unable to exactly imagine what nirvana is like, and I find that each of us has a somewhat different take on what it must be like. We all have our own views on the matter, our own views. We really cannot know what it is like to experience nirvana, and time spent trying to figure it out for ourselves is time spent developing a view of something we cannot know except by direct experience. The practice of the Buddhist path is one of letting go of views, not of building them up. So there is really no point in trying to understand or define what nirvana is like. The Buddha himself has told us that it is not describable, as you'll see from the quote from the sutta that I'll offer at the end. Now, all of this talk was just to get to the point where I could tell you that when the Buddha talks in the suttas about all things being contingent, he makes an exception with something he calls the unconditioned, which is the state of nirvana, which is living without a self that clings to the 5 aggregates, living life without the filters of our definitions and views. Nirvana, by its very nature, cannot be described, and there is no use in trying to describe it. As such, it is the only thing in Buddhism that requires substantial faith if you have any need to believe in it at all, which you really don't. Another thing the Buddha has said is that this path is good at the beginning, good in the middle, and good at the end. And I have found that to be true, so far as my experience of the beginning and the middle has gone. This practice offers real insight into the way the world works and valuable skills that will improve your life, all based on personal, direct experience with no extreme weirdness needed to achieve these ends. If someday you achieve nirvana, then you will know it is possible and know what it is like. But there is no need to set nirvana as a goal. Therefore, no need for faith in its existence, or guesswork to build up views of what it's supposed to be like. My advice to you regarding nirvana is this: let it go. So here is a piece of a sutta in the Sutta Nipata as translated by H. Sadhatissa. A fellow named Upasiva is puzzled by all the talk of nibbana, of extinguishment, and comes to ask the Buddha about it. He starts with this question: when a man is free from attachment to all pleasures and depends on nothingness, and everything else he lets go, he is freed in the supreme freedom from perception. But will he permanently be there and not return again? When a man is free, said the Buddha, from all sense pleasures and depends on nothingness, he is free in the supreme freedom from perception. He will stay there and not return again. Master, If this man stays many years in this state without returning, will be cooled and freed there itself, say whether consciousness will still exist for such a person. It is like a flame struck by the sudden gust of wind, said the Buddha. In a flash it is gone out, and nothing more can be known about it. It is the same with a wise man freed from mental existence. In a flash he is gone out, and nothing more can be known about him. Please explain this clearly to me, sir, said Upasiva. Has the man disappeared? Does he simply not exist? Or is he in some state of perpetual well-being? When a person has gone out, then there is nothing by which you can measure him. That by which he can be talked about is no longer there for him. You cannot say that he does not exist. When all ways of being, all phenomenon are removed, then all ways of description have also been removed.